Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I want to introduce Jessica Prois. She's the executive editor for Huffington Post Impact and Good News. Her work as a journalist has appeared on CNN, NPR, MTV, AOL, and of course, HuffPost, among other outlets. She's also spent a lot of time volunteering. She's worked as a volunteer at City Soccer. It's a nonprofit tutoring program in New York. And she's also on the Nation Swell Council. That's a program in New York. It's service-related network of professionals that's dedicated to giving back. So without further ado, Jessica.
All right, sorry about that. Okay, hi everybody. I'm Jessica. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled to be part of MCON and also to just be in the great city of Chicago. This is where I went to grad school actually, and I'm from Minneapolis and live in New York, so I kind of think of Chicago as a fun combo pack of the two. So, as Rena said, I'm the executive editor of Huffington Post Impact and Good News, and so Impact kind of covers more of the humanitarian social good stories, and then Good News covers sort of the more heartwarming, restore your faith in humanity type of stories. So I kind of always say that my day consists of poverty and puppies. So I'm going to be talking about how the internet and storytelling can create change, and so talking a little bit about reporting and the actual content, and then some of the emerging platforms that a lot of us probably have kind of a love-hate relationship with at this point. So let's get into it. So you guys remember when the internet was kind of all work and no play, and now sometimes it feels like it's sort of become just a big loud party where, you know, it's a non-exclusive party where the barriers to entry are pretty low. It's loud and chaotic, and it's a place where everyone wants to be heard, and people think that everything they have to say is important. And that's actually a good thing, because that means that the internet's really fertile ground for creating change. So now that the gang's all here and the internet is one big party, how do you tell stories in a way that gets noticed and thereby creates some change in the world? And so it turns out that all you need to do is adhere to some sort of standard party rules, which includes staying classic, being seen, knowing your audience, and talking to the right people. So the first rule is that classic is always in style. So I think, you know, we have this conversation a lot at HuffPost where we're talking about, you know, we've got the content and we've got the platforms, and sometimes it feels like, you know, with all these emerging platforms, we're kind of drunk on the opportunity. Like, what can we do with Periscope? What can we do? You know, how can we make this Vine go viral? But I think that sort of some of the old cliches, like, you know, the message is still more important than the medium, I think that still rings true. So, you know, I'm going to talk about some examples of really good, just old-fashioned reporting that reveals injustices and holds stakeholders accountable and spotlights people who are fighting the good fight, ultimately. So, you know, we've seen these stories create change now on a municipal level, on a government level, on a global level, on a personal level. And so I'm going to share some examples. So this picture, this is, her name's Amelia, and I met her, I did a reporting fellowship in Mozambique, and back in October. And so she's 46, and she had never used a condom before. And so I was shadowing some global health workers who were instructing local people in the village about HIV prevention. And so I wrote her story, told her story, and it ended up being one of the most shared pieces on HuffPost that week, and thereby prompted a bunch of donations to the Global Fund as well. this is an example from one of our, so this is a legislative example, an example of storytelling that created change on the legislative level. So our reporter Melissa wrote this story about a woman who was killed by her ex-boyfriend. And so through her reporting, Melissa asked the state of Arkansas, which is where it took place, basically, why police weren't better trained on preventing domestic violence. And so this ended up, actually a state representative saw her story and was inspired by it and enacted legislation that was actually named after the slain woman, Laura's Law, that mandated better police training. And so not only did this story create legislative change, but it also sort of laid groundwork for, you might remember the Twitter movement, Why I Stayed, which explored why domestic violence victims don't leave their abusers sometimes, and also the Yes All Women movement too, which talked about the ways that all women experience violence. So, and then the outcome of this was that the governor, the Republican governor, signed the bill into law this year. This was another legislative example, actually. So our reporter Jason wrote a story about heroin treatment in January, and it was a treatment that was effective that we weren't using. And so after his story was published, he received all of these personal stories of people who changed their course of treatment because of his story, and which is incredible in itself. And then more publicly, legislation was introduced that would then alter the course of treatment at federal and state levels, and a policy change took place. So this is an example that I think speaks to the power of blogging. So one of our reporters, Curtis, he's doing some Christmas shopping, I think October 2013, and so he noticed Hallmark created this this sweater and this ornament that said, "Don, we now are fun apparel." So they took out the word gay, and so he just noticed this on his own, and then he wrote a blog post calling out Hallmark. So he wrote sort of this, about his experience as a gay man, seeking this kind of revisionist, pretty hateful approach. And so I think this is interesting because we see a lot of examples of calling out corporations, but the fact that he kind of put his own personal spin on it, it went really viral, and there was sort of the internet brouhaha that we've seen before. But I think that because it was written in a blog form, it sort of had a deeper meaning to it. So I think we're at a point right now where at HuffPost, our blogs are our most shared pieces of content. It's always, when we look at our weekly stats, it's always blogs that are in the top 10. And so I think part of it, we're always kind of sitting there trying to figure out why, but it seems like, now everybody's sort of writing the same things. Like when you look at your news feed, you see HuffPost and BuzzFeed and Mike and Washington Post, and everybody kind of sharing the same story. And so I think something, if you've got a unique take on something or an opinion that others don't have, that's usually the stuff that seems to be going more viral lately. Another example, the recent after the Charleston shooting. So everybody, none of our just kind of straight news coverage was in our most shared list. So it was all sort of, opinion pieces from religious leaders and, stories that everyone else didn't have. So I think I think blogs right now are one of the most important platforms, and I think it's just because everybody's kind of writing the same thing, but nobody has your personal story, and so it's something different, it's something unique. And this might be one of my favorite examples of storytelling that can create change. So this was, I think this is an example of one of those stories that that probably wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. It's one of those viral examples where you can just kind of say, you can attribute this to the internet. So we wrote about the fact that black dogs are often not adopted because of our stereotypes. And it's sort of like a latent stereotype that we have. But so it raised awareness for an issue a lot of people weren't aware of before. And then all the dogs in this story got adopted. So if we have the investigations, the heroin example, the domestic violence example, these examples of what's not working, we also have this section that we just launched called What's Working, where we're spotlighting stories about solutions and people who are actually working to create change. And so these stories they share really well, and they share just as well as, a hot take or an investigative piece, and people will, share them with a status like must read. And so, we kind of talk about why that is. And I think as our news feeds kind of feel more divisive, and we've got content about beheadings and failing schools and incendiary political rhetoric, I think people want to kind of come together on the one thing we have in common, which is a sense of humanity. So a lot of these stories, they're not just about policy, it's about people just generally being good to one another, and we call that what's working. And I think, that's kind of the power of anecdotes. I think if we want people to think change is possible, I think they kind of have to believe that people are generally good. So our What's Working section has stories about policy, but also anecdotal stories about people doing good things for the world. And the big picture with writing stories about solutions is that we actually want to create what we're calling copycat solutions. So you've heard of copycat crime. So we want businesses and nonprofits and governments to read these stories and then create their own copycat solutions. Okay, so the next party rule for storytelling that creates change, knowing your audience. So at HuffPost, we really know our readers inside and out. Our audience is young and passionate, engaged. 40% are under 35, and almost 60% of our traffic are returning unique visitors, and 47% of our traffic comes from mobile. So, and what's more, half of our audience also is outside of the US. So they're really tuned into issues and causes worldwide. We're also paying a lot of attention to just what the general public cares about and what resonates with them in terms of causes. So this is a graphic from Facebook. You'll see that politics, vets, health, government kind of top the list. But what's interesting is that the greatest response was they're interested in any cause. So I think that's interesting because it means they're simply moved by a good story. And how do they find these stories? So the next party rule, being seen. I think, I wanted to talk beyond just the standard Facebook and Twitter, social media platforms. I think that, Instagram is a great example of how visual storytelling can actually create change. And so we talked about the investigative stories, the blogging, but I think photos really have this great power. And so as an example, we partnered with UNICEF on World Water Day, and we actually let them do a takeover of our account. And we ended up raising enough money to provide, I think, 100,000 days of water for people in need. So it was just a really cool kind of case study in different partnerships that you can do. And kind of speaks to the power of alternative media. It doesn't need to just be stories told in traditional news format. Video, I think, is really interesting right now. And there's sort of, I read this stat that said that there's an hour of video uploaded every second to YouTube. And I think right now, we're hearing things like eventually 70% of all the content that we consume is going to be video, and everyone's sort of, I think, kind of panicking about how to effectively execute it. I thought this was a good example. New York Times did, you probably saw this women's prison series, and it actually incidentally was branded content, and it won an award. So I thought it was just a good example of video that was purposeful, created awareness, it was monetized, and it was just really great storytelling. So I'm gonna, oops. Okay, I didn't know this was just gonna autoplay. So this is, I think another interesting trend with video right now is how a brand's ad can go viral if it's just a really good story. And this is one that I kind of wanted to give props to Pedigree, and just because of the fact that I think now every brand realizes they have to be sort of politically correct, but this was an ad where Pedigree used dogs to sort of delve into the idea of race. And so it's a man who encounters, so it's a white man who encounters a black man on the street, and it's sort of, the message is sort of about tolerance and unconditional love. And I thought it was, it's important because it wasn't, for brands to sort of tackle these topics that, could alienate consumers, or, it's not like a safe cause, like children's welfare or something like that. I think it's pretty admirable, and what that's doing is creating sort of, it's helping to pave the way for just sort of more tolerance. And so I was gonna have us watch it, but I don't think we have time. And so finally, the last party rule is basically just surround yourself with people who are on a similar mission. So I think, we have partnerships with different media outlets, some of which are actually represented here. You're going to hear from Upworthy. But I think, ultimately that's the greatest party tip, to surround yourself with others on the same mission, and that's really the best company to keep. So, cheers.
Give this to you, Jess. Okay. Having little mic issues here. I was wondering, with Facebook, does sharing something online have just as much power as liking it?
I think that's. Is this right now?
It's good. They'll turn it on. Yeah.
I think. Actually, I think we've sort of evolved in that way. It's almost like a share has more value than a like. A like is kind of saying, okay, yeah, I like this. But a share is almost like, I identify with this. It's kind of part of my, personal brand, and I want people to know I stand for this.
I want to take a question here. How do you respond to the growing hypersensitivity to social issues? The internet seems more like a yelling match than a debate. How do you cut past all that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that is actually like a concrete tip that people should heed in sort of spreading a message about an issue that they want to create awareness about, is that it shouldn't, you shouldn't be talking at people, and it's kind of like what I said, our news feeds already feel divisive enough as it is, and so I think as much as you can make it a conversation, as much as you can make it sort of, the subtext of your messages, this is an issue that I'm passionate about, this is an issue I care about, but that doesn't mean you have to feel the same way.
Talking about clicks and engagement, what does success look like, and how can this be translated to other businesses looking to build an audience?
I think, sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, it's talking about sort of engaging the audience in clicks. How do you build, what does success look like, and how do you build that from clicks?
Yeah, I think it's, I guess the tricky thing is that some of these topics can be sort of esoteric sometimes. So if we're writing about something like female genital mutilation, or an issue that people might not even have context for, much less care deeply about, it's sort of figuring out how you can make the story appeal to the masses. So when we have these conversations about packaging with the right photo and a headline that's accessible to people, and so we kind of ask, there's sort of this series of questions that we ask ourselves, like, how do we, why is this story newsworthy? Why are we writing about it? How can we make people care? And I think that's always the biggest question, how can you make people care? And so, we always sort of try to make sure that we pull out something that proves like why this is a basic human rights issue, whether we're writing about water or FGM or homeless vets. Because I think that's something that everybody can sort of grasp, the idea that this is a human rights issue and it's unfair and we should do something about it.
How do you cut past, I'm thinking about just the past few hours, the big focus in Boston was Dzhokhar Tsarnaev trial. When everyone is covering the same issue or news, how do you cut past it to deliver something that's different and not just the simple, straight facts?
Yeah, I think actually, that the What's Working initiative sort of comes into play there. And I mean, admittedly, at first in our newsroom, people were kind of saying, "Oh, is this like some fluffy PR thing? Like we need to fit our stories into an agenda?" And it's really not that at all. It's sort of just consciously, the day after breaking news happens, like Ferguson or Baltimore, we look at what people are doing to rebuild their city, or what, or businesses that are giving out free food, or just sort of like these incidental things that kind of, in moments like this, I think the idea of like restoring your faith in humanity, it sounds cliche, but I think it's something that people want to share and they want to read about. And so that's one angle. And then I talked about blogging, and after the Charleston shooting, our religion section asked all of these religious leaders to just blog about, what this means and how we can kind of go on undeterred. And so those kinds of stories felt kind of more progressive, not just like fluffy and uplifting, but actually like, signifying that there's progress to be made. That's the kind of stuff that did well, above just the straight news.
So they're just showing that there's some sort of social connection, that people are trying to make a difference, that there's an impact that can be reached. Lots of excitement online here about blogs, that you said blogs are desirable content. Question here, I'm wondering, how do you wade through the enormous amount of content to find quality on blogs?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, if you're, the good thing is like every nonprofit has a blog now, right? And so the good thing is you get like dispatches from, their aid workers out in the field and that kind of thing. Like, during Nepal, you couldn't really send reporters into the area right away. So it was, there were aid workers that were sending pictures, and they were actually like critical, crucial updates. But yeah, when it comes to sort of just, the fact that everyone has an opinion and is able to share it, I guess that's why it's important to sort of cultivate an intelligent, cadre of people that you follow, that you trust when they share something. That it's not just like something that hasn't been vetted or whatever. It's not something that has a fake name. Like, let's be honest, there's a lot of sort of like content factory sites that have launched where it's like there's not even a person. The author isn't even a real person. It doesn't even have. It's like a fake name and a fake picture. So it's kind of, I guess that's up to us to kind of be media literate about it. But yeah, the good thing now is you can kind of trust your network, right?
So tell us, as we're wrapping it up here, what would you say in the past few years that you've noticed the big change online when it comes to what you do in your work?
I think, I've been at HuffPost for 4 years, and I think that we really used to see sort of people only covering the safe causes, like children's welfare or animals, or even veterans, things that were kind of like unequivocally non-controversial. And now we're seeing so much progress being made on issues of race and gender issues, and even sort of the issues that we maybe feel scared to talk about. Like, I think Tumblr is a great place to sort of delve into issues. Like, they have a really great suicide and eating disorders feed, where the great thing about that is that that's really one-on-one storytelling that's making a difference, because you've got people who are able to sort of be a sounding board for others or share professional resources, or you hear stories on Tumblr of people who literally, in fact, say, this person saved my life by telling me their story, making me feel like I wasn't alone. So it's almost the fact that Tumblr can kind of be a connector for some of these issues that people are going through, I think that's another powerful form of storytelling.
I didn't realize that about Tumblr. Well, Jessica, we want to wrap it up. Thank you so much. It was really enlightening. I had no idea about some of these things that HuffPost is doing as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you all.